So here we are at the Oval for the final test of this Ashes series. Unfortunately, the Manchester rain denied us what looked like it was going to be the ultimate finish here with a deciding test. Instead, the urn is safely back in Australia's hands for at least another couple of years, and England are trying to level the series at 2-2 as they did in 2019. England have confirmed their 11, as is their style these days. It's unchanged from Manchester, which means another outing for James Anderson. Vish, any surprises in that they've stuck with the same 11?
No, not really. There was a bit of stiffness floating about, as is usually the way at the end of a 5-test series. Chris Woakes had a bit of a quad strain or a quad something or other. There was also fears about some of the bowlers because by the, I suppose the rest of the bowlers, because by the third day of that Manchester test match, the footmarks were, a bit off, or rather the footholes, as it were, where the bowlers landing was a bit iffy. But to be honest, I think the rain probably helped. The fact that we only got 30 overs of play within the first 2 days, and the fact that the fast bowlers only bowled about half of them between them because of the light as well. So, now all told, I think that's pretty much it. They've Ben Stokes has been one of those captains, one of those few England captains who treats the dead rubbers, as it were, because it isn't technically a dead rubber in terms of the series, but treats them as any other test match. And I think the importance of doing that has basically been part of the reason they've been able to carry this through. The fact that they didn't let up against Pakistan in the winter, they didn't let up against New Zealand in the winter, is a very different proposition now. And so, they're going into this wanting to win, of course, but in terms of unchanged, I think basically having found that right balance at Headingley, this is exactly the team that he wants going forward, certainly in the near distant future.
Well, Australia haven't confirmed their 11 just yet. It sounds like the one decision they've got to make is how to get Todd Murphy back into the 11. It was a controversial decision, shall we say, not to go with a specialist spinner at Old Trafford, and their attack did look one-dimensional. The feeling is that Cameron Green is the vulnerable player. He's had a tricky series, hasn't really found his rhythm. He obviously missed that game at Headingley, which probably didn't help either. So if Mitchell Marsh who has also suffered a bit of that general stiffness that Vish touched on for some of the England players, if he pulls up okay today and the selectors are confident he can bowl 10, 15 overs as needed, he will likely retain his place at number 6, and Murphy will come in for Green to give Australia what you might say is the traditional balance of their side. One of the big talking points for Australia over the last 24, 48 hours has been some of these retirement rumours started by certain people with a large media profile. David Warner put it to bed yesterday that he was going to retire after this test match. He's still sticking to leaving after the Pakistan series in early January. The other name floated around was Stephen Smith, and that's been knocked on the head as well. So don't think we're in for any imminent retirement announcements from either side, actually, but it is worth saying that this will be a bit of an end of an era test match for these two teams. Both sides are distinctly the other side of 30 in their average age. So when the two teams next meet in a couple of years down under, it will be two very different looking teams. Vish, just on the point of it being 2-1 to Australia in the urn being safe and us being denied that grandstand finish, what do you think the atmosphere and the mood of this game is going to be like this week?
I think people in terms of punters will come into it thinking that it will have an end of term feel, but given what we've heard from Pat Cummins in terms of wanting to be the first captain since, who was in place in 2001, was it
2001? Steve Waugh, yeah.
Well, Steve Waugh, yeah. To be the first Australian captain since Steve Waugh, even just that phrase in itself is, there's gravitas there. But to take home an Ashes from overseas, that clearly adds something on it. It clearly speaks to one of the reasons why those celebrations were subdued at Manchester, not least because of the rain, but primarily because having celebrated in quite a big way in 2019, they didn't finish the job when they came here. And similarly, I think England are the kind of side where, there's been a lot of talk about them trying to impose themselves on other teams, and that is essentially what they're about. But they also want a bit back as well. And I think maybe for the first time since Lords, Australia will come at England hard from the off, really, and not kind of wait to see what England do, but maybe actually go on the offensive here and take this series win by force, because they were too meek in 2019, selection issues, everyone was a bit, that was a very end of term test match.
Well, even Pat Cummins has spoken in the last 24 hours about how he's never felt so cooked as he was in that game. It's the only game he's ever feared he wouldn't play because he was basically knackered. Despite playing 5 tests already over here with the game against India 2, he says he's feeling fine. I guess you can debate that given how he bowled at Manchester, but there's clearly a motivation there to make amends for 2019.
Yeah, and I wonder if, having I know it's a short turnaround, but having your focus quite narrowed here, you can see the light at the end of the tunnel, but you can also see what the achievement is right there to be seized, isn't it? And so, you get the impression just from seeing them training as they are behind us now, everyone just seems a bit sharper. If anything, the more jovial of the two teams are the one that are losing, which has been the case throughout, really, hasn't it?
Yeah. Well, even though we know where the Ashes are heading at the end of this game, well, they're not actually heading anywhere, they always stay at Lords, of course, but we know that the urn is in Australia's hands. Let's hope that this series, which has thrilled us from start to finish, really gets the finish it deserves.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube, and for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app, and for premium content plus live streaming, make sure to subscribe to ESPN Player.